Welcome! You are watching episode 29 of the Mobility Talks, the web series by EIT Urban Mobility on all things mobility. In this episode on efficient public space management for better mobility systems, we are going to take you into the least mobile of all areas of urban mobility. Yes, you heard it right, the stationary part, the part where you need to park, and all the public space management issues around parking as more and more mobility systems interact in public space. I was actually in Copenhagen last weekend and came across a sculpture by Jens Galschiot, which caught my attention as it's not every day you see such an explicit gesture in an art installation in public space. So I looked into the meaning of it a little further, and it turns out the middle finger is addressed to the city of Copenhagen and a private parking company whose plan was to build a 3-story underground car park. The sculpture itself is erected on public space, reminding us that not all public space is necessarily space for mobility. And it protests against plans to build a car park, which is a necessary infrastructure when driving a car, because at one point you're going to need to park it. But if there is no car park, what is the alternative? Parking the car on the streets? We are accustomed to city streets lined up with cars on either side. All that is taking up public space. But again, what are the alternatives? Reducing public space? Reducing parking space? Making parking space more expensive? Shifting to other modes of transport? We have seen in recent years the development of new forms of mobility, with shared mobility around cars, but also with bicycles and scooters. But there will always be the question of parking, as shared vehicles need to be parked somewhere and somehow. These forms of mobility also represent new types of challenges for public space, as they are typically less restrained than car traffic. They can be free to roam in public space, and part of their appeal is precisely the freedom they offer to cut across squares, parks, pavements, and roads. In particular, scooters have been under criticism, and some cities have gone as far as to ban shared scooters from their streets. And this is partly due to the lack of organized parking, with scooters cluttering up public space. Dealing with the pressure of people not only coming and going, but also staying, and in many cases parking, says something about the way public space is managed for mobility. Should my city be proud because it's easy to park? Should my city be proud because it's a nightmare to park? Should my city not have any private parking options at all? Or should my city only allow for parking shared vehicles? I could go on with my list of questions, and luckily I am joined by fantastic speakers today who will help us shed light on these issues. I'm pleased to introduce Martina Hertel. She is Research Associate and Project Manager at Difu, the German Institute of Urban Affairs. Hello, Martina. Sebastian Schlebusch is Head of Market Development at Dott. Hi, Sebastian. Carlos Mateo is Mobility Director of EMT Madrid. Hi, Carlos. And Martin Tredelmeier, he is Senior Manager for Strategic Partnerships at Ski Data. So welcome to the four of you, and I would also like to introduce you to yourselves. You were 124 to register for this episode, which shows a lot of interest for the topic, especially as we see participants coming from 31 different countries, so a warm welcome to all of you. We also see a strong interest from private sector representatives and academia today, so we'll try and balance between the conceptual aspects of public space management and then also delve more into the practical aspects of introducing better mobility systems. So I'm counting on all of you to make this conversation relevant, ask your questions, raise your comments, engage with our speakers. You can use the chat and the Q&A, and as usual, I will be monitoring both and raising them with our speakers. So we'll first start with a short presentation from each speaker, and then we'll move into a panel discussion. And I'd like to start then with Martina first to give us some reflections on the value of public space, and in particular, do you consider that all public space should be space for mobility? Martina, over to you.
Well, thanks for this very nice introduction. It could be from my slides, but I prepared some other aspects you may not expect at this point. I want to talk about the reallocation of public space, or should we use up all public space for mobility? We do have a problem. We have floodings in Europe. We have storms. We have at the same time droughts. In short, we have it's warming up. We have more and more heat days, and we have a climate change due to rising greenhouse gas emission. So we have to look how we can cut down the CO2 emissions. And I show you a graph from Germany, where I come from, where my institute is located. But I'm pretty sure this graph would be alike in most of your countries. We have a decline in CO2 in most sectors, in agriculture, in the industry sector, for households, for energy. The only sector which doesn't perform pretty well is the transport sector. We have to cut down the CO2 emissions in that sector. And what we're going to do is we want to have, or we promote a modal shift. The modal shift is about, that tells you how you're going to use, I'm pretty sure you know what a modal shift and the modal split is alike. But we can see that most of the trips are still done by car or by car passengers. These are the people who drive along, and that the public transport, the pedestrians, and the bicycle needs to be promoted. And this has something to do with where to park and how we about the whole infrastructure. So the question is a bit, what cities do we promote? I don't want to be, or this is not the ideal city in my perspective, but there are things on that picture which I want to talk about. We have a dense city, we have green and blue infrastructure, and not only gray infrastructure. Gray infrastructure is, in my point of view, the infrastructure that you would need for the transport sector, no matter if it's driving or parking or whatever. So we should not use up all public space for the transport sector. One of the cities I took as an example, I have quite a number of cities, but I thought you come from all over Europe. So I take not a German city, but a Spanish city. That's Vitoria-Gasteiz. And they've performed quite well because they've started to change their model share from 2006 to 2019. And they succeeded quite well by pushing up the pedestrian, the cycling, and pushing out cars, not only the driving, but especially because they introduced parking management. What they did is they removed about 2,000 parking spaces in public space, and at the same time they've introduced higher fees for parking in the city. And with that money, they introduced a new public transport system, a modern low floor tram, and sort of changing the completely outlook of the city. They implemented walking and cycling strategy, and they implemented super blocks. So the whole thing is about push and pull measures to reclaiming public space in Vitoria-Gasteiz. About the walking strategy, I took those pictures early in the year, but it's green all over in summertime or in springtime when you need it. And it's important to sort of like, they had a high percentage of pedestrians in the beginning, but they pushed it even more to quite a high amount. They implemented a cycling strategy, especially with parking for bicycles, which was not there before, that had not been there before. And I'm pretty sure you have heard of the super blocks in Barcelona, but they were introduced actually in Vitoria-Gasteiz more or less at the same time. Actually, the people from Vitoria-Gasteiz say they were ahead of that. And the idea is to not allow drive through that super block, but sort of like have only restricted traffic in a super block and gain space for being there for walking, cycling, and for just enjoying and to stay in city areas and not move out due to heat situations. To summarize this, the mobility sector is very important for the CO2 reduction and other climate protection initiatives. We are talking about a model shift to public transport, to pedestrian and cycling, and not just a turnaround to electromobility. I know that's going to be a topic later on, but I want to insist on that model shift. Push and pull measures play an important role for the cities. The integration of green and blue infrastructure in public space become more and more important for climate adaptation. We have to unseal areas in public space to have like that a city stays livable. We have a number of successful pioneer cities, but when you have a closer look to them, the transport or the transition, the mobility change had not fully achieved there either. Most of the time, that's because all those measures only addresses the inner city areas, and especially outskirt and those urban the adjacent urban regions are not sort of addressed. Public space should be used only for should be not only used for mobility needs, but also give room for green and blue infrastructure. But it takes quite a big courage to reallocate public space, especially for the implementation. Well, that's all for now, and I'm give back to Jean-Paul.
Thank you so much, Martina. And so you're already, suggesting that, parking policy can have an effect on the modal shift. But what you also highlight is that there is an interaction between what happens in a city centre and what happens on the outskirts. So one needs to think of that in a holistic way and not just act in the city centre. Okay, brilliant. Thanks a lot, Martina. Then next up then is Carlos for EMT Madrid. Carlos, how do you then develop a parking policy that can actually accommodate then for different mobility systems in a city? Carlos, over to you.
Thank you so much for having me here and having the opportunity of sharing what we are doing in Madrid in this case. Well, okay. First of all, let me to introduce what EMT is briefly. EMT is the public transportation company that we have here in Madrid. We belong to the city council, and our core business has been the urban bus service since the very beginning. But a long time ago, we realized that we can contribute more for the city. So we started new mobility services like a parking lot network, Bicimat, that is the e-bike sharing scheme that we have in Madrid, a towing service, a mobility as a service platform, and we even manage the cable car in the city. We have another two business lines regarding consultancy and publicity. Well, as I said, we are a public company, so our strategic plan is really aligned with the strategy of the city regarding sustainability and air quality. So when we set our strategic plan in 2021, we already identify that we can contribute more for the city to the city if we think in our parking lot network like as a mobility infrastructure. And from this first view, we develop our view of moving our moving our parking lot network to be mobility hubs. For us, mobility hub, it's an area, it's a space, an infrastructure that has to contribute to transform the mobility in the city. And for doing that, we have clear criteria when we think of them to push intermodality, active and shared mobility. We also want to make easy the electrification of the vehicle park. And we also think that the mobility hubs can improve the logistics in the city that impact a lot in mobility in general. As a summary, we think on mobility labs like a living lab for sustainable mobility. So we are really open to giving a place in our mobility hubs for all those activities that can contribute for transforming the mobility in Madrid in this case. Well, for sure, our view is that the mobility hub development has to be taken in under the umbrella of the digitalization of the infrastructure, because the digitalization is a key point for Madrid 360. That is the sustainability strategy that we have here in the city. Once we identify the project of moving the parking lot network to mobility hub, we set off a specific mobility hub strategy. So we are planning to build up to 9 new mobility hubs in Madrid. We already built 3 of them, and this year we plan to open the next one. And we are getting more and more experience on this topic. We took all those theory about the mobility hub, what they have to do, what they should have, and we put it in practice. And even we are developing like an internal manual with the main criteria, the main lines to design those mobility hubs to be as useful as possible for the city. At least every time that we think in a mobility hub, we think in car sharing, motor sharing, we think in secure bike parking, in an EV charging station. We give some space to battery swap business model and also for logistics. In our first experience, in Madrid with Mobility Hub. It's Canalejas 360, and I can say that it could be still our flagship because it's really difficult to find a similar integration of mobility services in any other place, not only in Spain, I think globally. And we dedicated a complete infrastructure in the very city center to be a mobility hub. First of all, we thought we had to implement an EV charging station. We have a 12 point charging points in that station, up to 400 kilowatts. This amount of power is not only for today; it's for tomorrow. We wanted Canalejas was like a message about our concern about the mobility transformation. We wanted to push the active mobility and to make easy people get the city center in their private bikes. So we put a secure bike parking and integrate it in the network of secure bike parking that we have in EMT. And one of the best thing we implemented, and it is working really, really well. I have to say that the best thing of Canalejas is not only we put in practice the theory, is that it is running really, really well. It's the car sharing area because you have the guarantee that you can get the city center in car sharing, and there are parking spots available. You control the availability with its car sharing app, so it is more easy to get the city center in that way. And even the companies tell us that they have like 6 times more rotation of vehicles in our mobility hubs than in the street. So it's a success. And we also gave some space for new business lines regarding focusing in battery swap process and also in logistics, as I said. And here in Canalejas, we not only gave some room for the traditional lockers network operated by different companies, but we thought in a urban consolidation center that is also working really, really well. So an operator can make the last mile delivery from this point that, as I said, it's at the very center of the city. So it is really useful, and the result is really good. Finally, lesson learned, it's you have to make livable spaces. So the design of the spaces is really important, and we took care a lot about the identity of the space, and we wanted it to be singular identity. We continue with this concept in Recoletos, that is our second mobility hub. In this case, the image is completely different. It's another concept, but it's also one of the important points when we design the mobility hubs. In Recoletos, our second experience, we implemented what we had in Canalejas, and we extended the services regarding logistics with some parking spots dedicated to loading and unloading. And we integrated the management of those parking spots with the app that we have here in Madrid for professionals to reserve the loading and unloading spots throughout the city. So we can control the logistic activity and the correct usage of those parking spots. A step forward that we are gonna do with this mobility hub, it comes from the on-chain project. That is, it's a project who EIT it is working as well. So. And this project is related with logistic planning, and we set a pilot inside the project in Recoletos for controlling better the availability of the loading and unloading parking spots with AI and camera with image recognition. So this is our next step, and well, you'll see the next of the next step in Plaza España, that is going to be our fourth mobility hub, that it is planned to be open this year. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Carlos. And maybe just to bounce back also on what Martina mentioned on the push and pull factors in relation to parking policy. So here you're building these hubs. Do you see this as a kind of a reactive step, in the sense that you're seeing different types of developments in the city and you feel you need an infrastructure that combines it all? Or do you feel that this is an active way of contributing to modal shift? And if so, how can you possibly measure the impact of that modal shift?
Well, when we designed this mobility hub strategy, and even our first mobility hub, because it is true that our specific mobility hub strategy um, came after our first mobility hub was built. We built our first mobility hub like a pilot, like an active actuation to improve the intermodality, and even maybe we weren't sure the logistics. And as we showed that it worked really well, we started to think that it has to be replicate
Replicated.
in other points of the city. It is true that our parking lot network is really strategically located throughout the city, so it is really useful to be mobility hub.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks a lot, Carlos. Now we'll be hearing then from Sepastian at Dott. So Sepastian, we saw a few images of the scooters, in the introduction. Do you think actually more rules governing micromobility would actually help for public space and for micromobility? Over to you, Sepastian.
So I'm talking about shared micromobility in public spaces, and specifically about the question of do we need more rules governing micromobility in the public space? But before going into this, let me first, my clicker is not working. Can you please? Yes, okay, thank you. So first introduce Dott. So we are a shared micromobility operator with more than 250,000 vehicles, operated in cities in 21 countries in Germany, in Europe and the Middle East, headquartered in Berlin, Amsterdam, and with key offices in Paris and London. And we are used by more than 10 million active users every single year. So before I'm answering the question, do we need more rules? I would first of all start about looking at the kind of rules that exist today. And my clicker still doesn't work, so move on please to the next slide. So I'm starting with the difference between docked systems and dockless systems. So there's plenty of different rules and logics to organize the public space. So traditionally, we've seen emerging in the 2000s, late 2000s, 2010s, the docked systems like we have in Madrid as well, operated by EMT, the BC Mat, or here in this picture, Velib in Paris. So publicly owned, managed, and funded bike sharing systems that are traditionally with one exclusive operator, that have long service contracts, 5-10 years or more, that have been quite impactful, but also very inflexible. And in the late 2010s, the dockless revolution basically was the answer to overcome this inflexibility and rigidness of the traditional docked systems. Then moving on, next slide, please. When we saw the first wave of the dockless revolution happening in our cities in 2018-19, we basically saw the free floating. Free floating, basically because there was no public space available dedicated specifically to this new form factor, to the new shared micromobility services. And this led obviously to quite some friction and problems on the public spaces, given the low amount of control and regulations on this. But thanks to the data generated and shared with cities from this free floating system, quite organically, we have been able to understand what the traffic patterns in our cities are, helping cities to create networks of dedicated parking spots, hubs to park shared micromobility vehicles all over the city. So now many cities are doing quite well in having developed hundreds of parking spots for shared micromobility. And actually, when we talk about today, we often talk about free floating, but actually we mean dockless. And that's it's an important aspect. Free floating really means you can park everywhere without any rules, but dockless means you don't have to dock into charging docks, albeit you might have to return the vehicles into those hubs. So there is a level of control in this version that is not free floating. And very few cities in the world today have actually free floating in the pure sense. Most cities, they have some sort of public space control, often also in hybrid systems. Next slide, please. Then additional components of the public space rules available in the tool set of cities is mobility hubs. Carlos have mentioned Madrid's mainly indoor mobility hub concept with a lot of different services integrated. There's actually another need for shared micromobility. We require a different but also complementary approach to this mobility hub concept from Madrid. I bring two examples here, one from Düsseldorf, one from Berlin. So on the left side, you see the mobility hubs, the mobility stations at street level in the center of Düsseldorf. So every 1 or 2 blocks, every 200 meters roundabout, will have the ability to park your shared two-wheeler. Then you also have on the right side the more neighborhood or block-based approach, so with a wider catchment area, which also includes car sharing services, public transport services. So there is different tiers of mobility hubs necessary for the different form factors and the different mobility needs. You need to have a closer distance to your two-wheeler for the near mobility than you have maybe for your car sharing, which takes you on a longer journey typically. Next slides. Now, all these different rules and logics, they not come isolated, but they come in different hybrid systems. So here again, I refer to the example from Düsseldorf. We have the mobility hubs in the city center. And I think this is a particularly well-designed scheme here. So first of all, we have the city center with a clear regulated parking logic. You must not and you cannot park outside of these dedicated spots, just because the old city center and the urban inner city, that's a quite highly sensitive area when it comes to parking pressure on public land. So we need to have it regulated. But then if you look at the peripheral, the outskirts, where you have less of a parking pressure, less of a sensitivity, free floating can be a very valuable, very impactful approach here, because actually this is the user's choice. If you ask yourself, where do you want to park your bicycle? You want to park it right in front of the house you're living in, or the destination you're going. So we need to also address this user perspective. And if we design parkings or regulated parking spots in the city centers, which is necessary, to reduce clutter, to reduce public space nuisance from too many vehicles there, then we need to make sure that we're creating a very high density of 30 or more of those hubs per square kilometer, that you can always find a vehicle and always find this parking space within 100 to 150 meters anywhere you go. Now, if we have dedicated space for parking. Then we can obviously think about, what next? What other use cases we could probably support to make shared micromobility more efficient and more cost effective. Yeah, and so we've been experimenting also with some upgrades with charging infrastructure, which on the one hand side reduces increases the orderliness. Yeah, you have quite nice aesthetics, just like with this traditional dock-based systems. But we also see benefits on the unit economics. So we don't have to swap that many batteries, but we can just let the user insert the vehicles into those charging racks and let them save money and time to operate the swapping tasks. So there is a convergence, I'd say, between the dockless and free-floating systems and the traditional docking-based systems now, and we see all kind of different scenarios here. Now, next slide. To the question, do we need more rules? Yeah, I mean, this picture shows it already, and we are kind of obsessed with this new form factor, the e-scooter, but it could be also a shared bike. That's less of a perception issue, but the e-scooter definitely is a perception issue. Everywhere we see an e-scooter, we're kind of tempted to say, oh, this is a nuisance here. Although if you look around in the city, a typical city of 500,000 inhabitants has a car space needed for parking cars of 4 or 5 square kilometers. And for e-scooters and shared e-bikes, even if you have them at high capacity, it's maybe 1% or 0.1% of this amount. So really, there's a perception issue which we have to look at. I think when the dockless e-scooters and e-bikes came into the market, we've actually put the finger into the wound that our cities are designed for cars. So the answer is not, do we need more rules? But next slide, we need more space. And we also need more consistency in the way we're organizing the space. I just gave you a couple of examples here. So upper left image is from Berlin. The Senate in Berlin has thought about an idea to just open up car parking spots for not for exclusive usage of shared mobility, which would be fine, but just if it's free, you can park your scooter. Now, imagine what happens if you as a car driver are approaching this so-called empty parking spot, and there's just 1 or 2 scooters parked. You step out, take them off, and put them on the sidewalk where they're starting to create an issue for pedestrians. On the left lower side, we see an image from Frankfurt. Frankfurt has decided initially that we're not supposed to park e-scooters at public bike parking racks, although this is quite intuitive from a user's perspective. On the right side, typically in free floating, you can park at sidewalks, but then the question is, how much of space do you have to keep free? 1.20 meters, 1.60 meters, 2 meters. Many different cities have many different rules. It's very unintuitive for the user and hard to communicate. And last but not least, and then with that, I'm stopping my presentation here. There are also a lot of park and ride dedicated parking spots for bicycles, which are not open up for shared bicycles. And the question is why? Why are you not able to use the same kind of parking infrastructure for bikes if you're using a shared bike? So we need to think a bit outside of the box, a bit more holistically, and remove those silos into our heads. Between e versus bikes, between private versus public, it's all a form of sustainable mobility that we have to support. Next slide, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sebastian, for taking us through the differences between, free-floating, dockless, and docked. That's something new on me, but it's important terminology. And we'll be also taking some of these points up in the discussion. Stay with us, Sebastian. Next up, then, is Martin for Ski Data. Welcome, Martin. So you will try and tell us a little bit how actually parking facilities do actually reflect then the mobility around it, Martin. So please, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Jean-Paul, and good afternoon, everyone. Not sure if my presentation is coming up. Here we go. Here it is. Yeah, I'm talking a little bit from a parking solution perspective today. Probably many of you are not so familiar with Ski Data. Ski Data is not a consumer brand, so we are in a B2B environment, and I will shed some light what we do and how it all started. So as the name suggests, we started in skiing. So, and we're still doing ski access solutions. We're the world market leader for that. And in the late 80s, we started parking access solutions. Together with Apcoa, we developed the first solutions. In the meantime, we have also become a global company in parking. And if you look at the very last picture on the right below, last year we also entered bike parking. We launched a new way of pedestrian access, which now can also be used for bikes. So this is a multi-purpose device. Here you see it with a bike, but it also can be used with wheelchairs in stadia. And definitely we also see demand for urban bike parking from different regions in Europe. So this is a little bit our story. Maybe not so relevant for many of you. So we are part of a bigger group. Assa Abloy is a Swedish company that is doing all kinds of entrance systems. And here we have a nice little video which will show you. Yeah, so this video should show a little bit the philosophy of SkiData Connect. So we think that parking is not a standalone thing in urban planning, and for sure it's also not a standalone thing in business. So there's not one company that can, solve the entire problem or cater all the needs of the different players in the environment there. That's why we partner up with many stakeholders who work with cities. We also do work with the city of Madrid. We also develop together with partners mobility concepts. We work with the Swiss railways. We work with the Belgian railways. We've been working with a company called Fluid Time in Switzerland to develop a mobility concept for the employees of Zurich Airport. So we definitely see what has already been mentioned now in the previous contributions, that parking is one part of mobility concepts, of mobility hubs. We definitely see that. And we also see that the concept of mobility hubs is also picking up in the commercial world. We're working with a big real estate group in North America, and they also start to incorporate mobility hub concepts into their new developments and into their refurbishment projects that they have. Really large projects in LA or in Charlotte. We also try to see parking as a certain step in the visitor journey. And one very important customer of ours is the city of Linköping in Sweden. It's about 200,000 people that live there, and very, very innovative team that is working there on the parking solution. We're very happy to partner with them. And whereas we typically provide off-street parking solutions, in Linköping we have really developed a parking solution for the entire city, on street and off street. And this is really a lighthouse project. For example, the city of San Francisco was so interested in what we're doing there that they decided to visit this city, of the comparably small city of Linköping. What has also been mentioned in previous contributions is pricing a little bit. We did a study together with MasterCard there, how changing the price of parking can impact the city life. What is the impact of people going into the city, into the center of the city? So that has also been very interesting. And as said before, Linköping is really open and really, really an innovative customer of ours. So this is a little bit our global presence. What we definitely see, for many of you, this is obvious, but for many of our traditional enterprise clients, this is maybe not so obvious, is that the expectations of consumers, of drivers, of citizens is that the experience must get more digital. Stadium access, for example, is also an important business for us, and stadium access also relates back to public transit, to parking problems. So again, another example of where more holistic mobility concepts are needed to facilitate a convenient citizen experience and also a decent urban planning approach. Skip that one. And I think I've come to the end. No, that's what I wanted to talk about. Yeah. 1 second. Here we go. So cities, we have it defined as a dedicated segment. Is also the strongest segment when you look at our revenue. And this is also kind of, spearheading the innovations that we're doing, bringing really new solutions, more digital solutions. Also working together with city tolling approaches on roads. So I think we can really be glad, to be part of this environment. And thank you again, Jean-Paul, for having us today here.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks a lot, Martin, for taking us through SkiData and how you try and facilitate access to spaces, essentially, including in cities. I think that we can essentially open up the conversation. We can bring in the other three speakers. I think you've all talked about, in some shape or form, the importance of this mobility transition, and I think it's clear that parking policy in that can have an effect. There was a poll that EIT Urban Mobility launched on its LinkedIn, which we can maybe just show the results of. And we see that, the most efficient parking policy, according to the responders on LinkedIn, 46% really went for reducing parking spaces for cars, followed at 28% by more space to multimodal hubs, probably looking a little bit like the example in Madrid. Martina, you talked about in your example that there was a reduction in parking spaces. Do you see this as the single parking policy lever, the single most important one? It's like a starting point for cities who want to try and work on this modal shift. Would you say start by reducing parking spaces and then build from there? Is that the way forwards, Martina?
No, it's definitely not one single measure. It's sort of one. As it turns out, there should be a strategy and a very fine concept behind it. And this concept includes more than one step. So reducing the number of parking spaces in public space or on street parking can be only just one step in a whole bunch of a lot of measures and a lot of steps. And important is that at the same time, when you try to push out cars either to outside or to off-street parking, you have to sort of like introduce pull measures as well. You have to improve the public transport and all the other modes of transport. Otherwise, you will get not very far.
Just more congestion, I suppose, to some extent.
Yeah.
And Sebastian, when cities are trying to look for reducing parking spaces for cars, is that typically then an opportunity to develop micromobility? I mean, are you kind of looking for that to develop like the relevant parking infrastructure then for micromobility to sort of replace each parking space for a car with micromobility? Is that like the way into the market to some extent?
I mean, obviously, always looking for more space and space at the right density and the right capacity for shared mobility. It's not very helpful if we are being squeezed together with other modes and like I mentioned, this example of this parking spots in Berlin. Yeah, you're creating another friction, like in Madrid, for example. One chat, we were supposed to park in dedicated parking spots for motorbike, and then because scooters are very simple, they weigh 25, 30 kilos, so you can easily move them aside. Motorcyclists, they have they found their spaces occupied and they have pushed the vehicles onto the sidewalk, and we got fined by the enforcement officers. So the solution here, we need to make sure that there is proper dedicated space, and yes, of course, cities are taking away cars, this parking space. It's not only for shared micromobility, for cities, and also for other purposes, of course, to keep it more resilient the effects from climate change, but shared micromobility is definitely leads to a multimodal integrated system.
There's maybe a slight issue with your microphone, Sebastian. It's a bit it's not so easy to hear you. So maybe you want to try and check which microphone you're actually speaking into. For Carlos now, because Martina also mentioned the link between city centers and the suburbs, right? And so I'm also wondering, when you're reducing parking spaces for cars in the city, and in your case, developing also the multimodal hubs, you still need to, in a big city like Madrid, I mean, manage the interaction with those people coming in and out from the suburbs. How can you act on reducing parking spaces for cars in the city center, potentially without doing that also in the suburbs?
I think Martina was pointed out a really important thing that we are really concerned in Madrid of. That is, it's not only about removing parking spaces. You have to. I think the challenge is doing that in a fair way. I mean, you can remove the parking spaces or implement whatever policy regarding pollution emission for vehicles or the parking space availability, but it's the city's responsibility to create options to not only removing the space. It's like, okay, I remove the space. It's more difficult for you moving in your private car, but you have convenient options to move instead. So that option creation, in parallel of the measure that you are doing to try to stop using the private car, for me is the real challenge that we have, is the more difficult thing that we have, because if you in the end, I think that everyone has the goal clear. So we want to go to cities. In our case, we think in Madrid like a city vertebrated in public transportation, complemented with shared mobility. So, but you are ruling for everyone. So it is needed you to offer options to complement what you are removing. So that's the point. For me, the difference between the city center and suburbs shouldn't be a big difference. So it's a matter of space availability and inhabitant density. So as more or more mobility you have in the area, more pollution. So maybe the measures that you are focusing in the city center has more impact in the area because there are more mobility. But in my opinion, the measure has to be applied to the whole urban area.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and I mean, we're talking about reducing parking spaces for cars. On the other hand, there might be instances where it's quite important to have a lot of parking space available. In a city, things happen, and I wonder, Martin, would it be fair to say that actually the point is not so much reducing parking spaces for cars, but it's reducing it in public space? I mean, maybe one could imagine a scenario where there is plenty of parking infrastructure managed privately, and users will simply just have to pay for that private infrastructure if they want to use their car. It's just that they're not able to park it on public space. I mean, there might be, I don't know, big events or whatever where people prefer to do it that way. Wouldn't that be a kind of a fair compromise?
Yeah, this real estate company that I mentioned in my presentation told me only like 2 or 3 weeks ago that in North America, for every car, there's 8 parking spots. So there is really a lot of space used for cars. I'm sure in Europe it's not the same. I'm sure we are not at eight parking spots per car, but still, it's a lot of space that is being used. And of course, it would be also interesting to understand the ratio, what's public and what's private. But yes, I mean, it's true what you're saying.
Maybe a quick comment from Martina.
Jean-Paul, basically, you're right to build as many parks as people want, but that's not very clever for 2 reasons. One reason is it's sort of like pretty expensive to build parking lots in the first place. We are talking between, let's say, 5,000 euros up to 20,000 euros for parking spaces in public areas, and up to 70,000 euros for off-street parking when you think about parking garages with difficult building grounds, like where you have to sort of like difficulties to build. And so it's first of all a matter of money. And on top of that, it's sort of the costs are spread all over the users. When you talk about the residential home, no matter if the tenant later on or the owner will have a car or not, she or he will pay for the parking lot through the building costs. So it's not a clever idea to build as much as you can. And on the second aspect is you're talking about concrete, and concrete is known as not very environmentally friendly, and so should really get a good ratio how many parking lots to build and how many or how many or how you manage your traffic demand or your transportation demand.
Okay, Martin, want to add something to that?
Yeah, I think Martina, you know, gave this a spin that was not the original idea of Jean-Paul when he brought this up. You know that you know, as many parking facilities as possible should be built. Yeah, and of course nobody builds a parking facility just for the fun of building a parking facility. That's also clear, right? But you know what I wanted to highlight is that if in North America every car has 8 spots, you know, this is a big waste of space, because of course a car can only occupy one single spot at a time, right? So this is something that should be optimized, right? And of course, if we move more into shared mobility, this is also the chance that parking spots can be occupied better and resources can be used more efficiently.
So there's a
And
comment in
you
the
know,
chat.
from what I've learned from these real estate companies, that they now actually incorporate this. You know, when they have new office buildings or new residential projects, that not necessarily every tenant automatically gets a parking spot. You know, there is a certain percentage of parking spots that is reserved for shared mobility. So it is something that, you know, makes commercially sense. So people do that, of course.
There's a comment actually in the chat. So the figure for France would be something like 1.85 parking spaces per car. So quite far
Okay,
from
so
from
significantly
the
less.
US. Yeah. So I'd like to also come back to changes in mobility systems and the effect on public space, and maybe Sebastian can take this one first, because you were talking about the introduction of shared micromobility and the infrastructure coming afterwards, right? And so I'm just wondering, in the sequence of events, do you think public space in a way should be closed to market-driven changes that bring these new mobility systems onto the streets? So closed until they have set up the relevant governance to provide for them. So essentially ban before you allow, kind of thing. Or do you think it's good the other way around, that you basically have new mobility systems emerging and gradually public space kind of adapts? What's the proper sequence of events, do you think?
Yes, thank you for this question. Very interesting. I think it's a bit a question of a mindset. You think of a city as a machine, yeah, would take top-down decisions that based on your expert knowledge and control everything, and that resembles a bit more traditional urban planning approach, quite bureaucratic, strict rules, regulations, no? And that's I would say is expressed by the emergence of the first wave of public bike sharing. Experts in the back office defining where to install the stations, and then you make a conscious decision, yes, because it's quite heavy investment system, but ignoring the fact that the things can change. And if you think more as a living system, so where you're appreciating that managing cities are too complex to be managed by one single stakeholder, just similar to as nature. So it requires a bit more an adaptive approach, including multiple stakeholders, including also a bit of a test and learn and try and error phase. So, and there really this emergence of Dott micromobility with a free floating in the first place and then growing gradually into hub-based and hybrid systems is a perfect example of an organic and adaptive approach. And I think despite the first initial issues we had, but we get into a situation where the control, or we find the right balance between public space control, accessibility for the user. So my take is no, let's be organic, let's be, of course, respecting the needs for everyone, not only for the user operators, but obviously for citizens, pedestrians, and non-users as well.
Okay, thank you. I mean, we understand you. It is definitely a little bit tricky, but I hope the audience as well can be, patient and just focus. Try, because we can understand you. Okay, we can
I'm
understand you.
sorry for that. Okay.
No worries. And maybe also the question to Carlos. I mean, you're, to some extent also managing public space. I mean, what's the approach here? I mean, should we let, new systems emerge and then gradually find a way to govern them, or ban beforehand until we have a system ready?
Well, I think a key point, and it's a thing that I think we really take care of it in Madrid, is the city, the public-private collaboration dialogue. We even because we even set some kind of organism completely dedicated to dialogue between the private actors and the city. So, for me, it is really difficult if we cannot expect the regulation. It's gonna be put before the in this case the micromobility system. Is even more difficult for me in thinking in the urban planning it's set before a micromobility system emerges. So for me, the key point is the open mind of the city to let this micromobility system to operate and to expand and try how they can contribute for the city, and in that dialogue set some basic rules to operate, and as you are operating while you are operating, you get some insights, you can change some things, but the for me the main thing is that the dialogue. So I think it's not if you wanna if you aspire, if you wanna have a regulation and a planning, a urban planning before a new mobility service is launched, it's gonna be difficult in the end for me. The city don't develop. In that dialogue, I think we can push this because you don't really know if this new mobility service is going to work or not. So you have at least you have let them try and see, and when you see how it works, the impact that have in the city, well, then you regulate it, or even you take it into account in the urban planning. But it's really important listen to the operators.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting because not all policy, in a way, comes from urban planning. I mean, there is also a certain amount of organic developments that sort of create also urban planning and public policy in itself. Maybe
Well,
to come back. Yeah,
I
please.
wanted to point out that Madrid, I think, is one of the cities with more car sharing system in operating. We have like six or something like that. Every of them fully electric. This is because the parking policy makes parking for free for electric cars. So the business model for them, it is better to have electric cars, and we don't have regulated the car sharing activity.
Hmm. Yeah. Okay, thanks. I'd like to come back to Martin. There's a question for you as well in the chat in relation to what you talked about with the city of Linköping and the research that you did with Mastercard on the prices of parking. Can you maybe share some top level results on that? Is there anything publicly available that we could potentially point people to?
It's not publicly available, unfortunately. But what we tried is to experiment a little bit with the prices, right? What happens if we decrease the price? Is there, more people coming into the city center to go shopping, for example? What I can say in general is that the parking price is overrated. So politicians think parking must be cheap in inner city environments so that it gets attractive for people to come into the city. But that does not hold true.
Okay, thank you. There's also a comment in the chat saying, I believe that reducing parking spaces may also backfire. Even when public transport is well developed, if you take away parking spaces for some commuters, that might lead to other kinds of problems, like
Yes.
illegal stops and disrupting traffic and things like that. So just to throw that comment out there as well. I would also
Yes, and if I can add
please.
something there, like 25 or 30% of the inner city traffic is caused by people looking for parking spots. So of course there is the risk if you take away parking spots that people even need more time looking for a parking spot.
Yeah, and I suppose the answer is the
we
modal
also need
shift.
to develop intelligent systems that bring you to the parking spot. If your navigation system brings you to the address of your doctor where you have an appointment, that's not of much help if there is, if you come by car and if there is no parking nearby, you will cause a lot of traffic, and that should be avoided. So we need more intelligent system, and of course also, a more comprehensive public transit system and a more comprehensive multimodal system, more intelligence in the systems.
So on that, maybe to bring Martina back in, because we often talk about the concept of, mobility as a right. So people have a right to be able to, move around and have an accessible infrastructure to do that. Conversely, do you believe that parking is a right in the same way, and that therefore, a certain amount of public space should always be reserved for parking? Because obviously, it also talks to, the more social aspects as well of being able to park and access certain parts of the city. That might not always be easy for everyone.
There we actually have a legal statement. There is no right for parking space in public in public space. It's sort of like it's a little bit legal question. There was a sort of like a long time in back in the last century, like the 1930s, 40s, 50s, parking on street parking was not so common, and then a German judge decided on street parking is legal, and this was used for a long time to um, um, uh, uh, to allow people sort of like, or give them the feeling that there is a right to park on street. But actually, that's not written down. It was just sort of a statement by a judge. And so from there, it's sort of like people perceived it as a right to park on street. And I'm pretty sure that a certain amount of parking spaces on street are necessary, no question, especially people for disabled people, loading zones, you name it, sort of like special kind. But why should a commuter use up parking lot for 8 hours a day? And while maybe somebody else, Martin was talking about the search traffic, while someone who wants to shop, customers are not going to find the space because the commuter sits on that parking lot. So I'm definitely into the whole system needs management, good management, and as less like when people know in some areas there are hardly any parking spaces, we have to drive into a garage, they will do it. I mean, it's easy to sort of navigate them there. So yeah, but come back to your original question. There is no right to park in public space.
Okay, and yeah, please, Carlos, please.
Okay, I'm baking up, Sebastian. The the point, I think that we don't consider parking as a right. We consider mobility as a right. So I think the city's responsibility is to build a public transportation network in a wide concept, a transportation network for the city that gives you really convenient options. This is the difficulty because and for me it's not valid to say, okay, you have the option to get from getting the point B from point A in a trip of 3 hours, while you have to spend like 30 minutes by car. I mean really convenient option, affordable and convenient economically and in matter of time. So this is, and if for this we have to change if for doing this we have to change the space distribution, let's do it, but in a fair way, in a parallel way, step by step, and giving option and removing space.
Okay, and so I will be very briefly the spokesperson for Sebastian. So Sebastian's view is that the right to park for everyone contradicts the right of mobility for everyone, as we have witnessed with car parking over the past decades. If we want to enable the right to mobility in the most space-efficient way, yet ensuring maximum flexibility, shared mobility is the answer. So I would say no, right to park a private vehicle, useful for one, unless justified by specific use cases, so mobility impaired or delivery and service vehicles, and yes, right to park a shared vehicle. Okay, so that's for Sebastian. Thanks for writing that for us. One question for Martin, in a way a little bit connected to the right to park, but it's the developments between cities reducing space for cars and potentially then, or whether you agree, real estate not necessarily taking that view, so providing for parking spaces for cars. And so gradually there's a kind of a mismatch, right, between the ability to park your car in the residential block, but you can't actually park it anywhere in the cities. I mean, do you see that divide happening?
Well, I think you do not only use your car to get into the city center, right? I mean, typically the connection into the city center from a residential area by public transport is quite good, right? So, you also have your car to, go to the countryside over the weekend or something like that. Yeah? So I think in general, the traffic to the city from urban residential areas will decrease in the coming years. So people will use more their bikes, will use more public transport. So really the inner city traffic, I don't see that much of an issue. So from that perspective, I'm quite positive about our future.
Okay, perfect. And then I would like to finish with a final thought on the impact of electrification, right, of mobility, because obviously this is more and more connected to parking as vehicles get charged up when they are parked, whether this in a form of a shared vehicle system or in a private vehicle. And I'm wondering what kind of effect that will have on the organization of public space. So just the fact that public space becomes this kind of massive power grid, essentially where parking provides power. how can urban planners basically best anticipate these changes of more electrification? Maybe like a kind of a final thought to address urban planners on this. Can I go to maybe Martina first?
It's a tricky question, because on one hand, yeah, we need e-charging in public space, although these days we don't have fuel stations in public space. It's private land. So yeah, but I'm with you. In some cases, I think you need loading, but again, maybe you can think of loading station at supermarkets and places like semi-public spaces. And on top, uh, e-charging, sort of like once installed, it should sit there for 10 or 15 years. And then sort of like this dedicated parking lot will be a parking lot for the next 10 or 15 years. This is something or you should keep in mind when you want to unseal or remove or transfer areas into super blocks and whatnot, where you put your charging station in public space.
Yeah, and maybe also for Carlos, because you were talking about these hubs. I mean, is that how you see the future of charging and linking parking and charging, or do you also anticipate a lot of charging stations in public space, more spread it around?
Well, the point is that in general the city want to promote the car park, the vehicle park electrification. No, I mean the private car electrification. So there are some to promote it. You have to make easy to charge. That's the point. So to make easy and affordable, because and one of the problems that I think we have is that the profitability of the charging spots in general is not. It's far away from the fuel stations. So maybe the presence of parking of charging points is not quite common to be improved by private companies. Maybe the big electrical companies can make this business model more interesting, but it is not the reality about is not comparable with the fuel stations. So I think if you want you want the citizens to change to electrical cars, you have to make easier for them to install points at home. You have to give solution for those people that don't have parking at home. So you have to promote companies to make possible people to charge while they are working. And also I have that you have to promote the possibility of charging when your car is parked. So it's a mix. I don't really think that you need a massive amount of space for installing power stations, charging points. Sorry, but I really think it's a mix of solutions that you need. Every solution focus on the electrification of the private vehicles. I think the quick charge solution could be a solution, but today maybe economically is not really clear that it is better to get an EV, an electric vehicle, to be charged every time in a fast charger, because the battery lasting and even the economics, because the business model, it's really expensive to keep that amount of power available for people. So it's quite difficult if they doing that without the city. So I think you have to give some space to make charging easy.
Maybe I can relate to that. I think what we really again need here is more intelligent systems, right? So if you take, for example, an airport, which is also public space, and we see in a system that Martina has a reservation for 8 days, then charging the car at low voltage is totally fine. Whereas, if you go to the city center and only have a coffee or, shop somewhere and have it parked for 30 minutes, of course, you need really a fast charging environment.
But for
And
me,
there's
the
really
challenge,
potential, I think.
it's giving a
Sorry?
solution for the day to day. So it's like, okay, it is possible to charge in the airport or in a shopping mall, but I don't go to the airport or the shopping mall every time that I need, and maybe it is really far from my home.
So maybe moving forwards, like the parking infrastructure will also be competing on their charging efficiency. That will probably
Yes.
become a key model. And maybe just once more to be the spokesperson for Sebastian, because we were having troubles with his microphone. So I'll just briefly give you some of his points on this question linked to electrification and parking in the context of micromobility for him. We can anticipate a transition away from proprietary charging stations for public bike sharing systems to charging stations that are compatible with different vehicle types. We can also anticipate a charging as a service model that provides operational savings for operators compared to current battery swapping operations. Many cities have today allocated specific spaces to shared mobility. We can obviously envision upgrading them with services that are useful for users and operators, and charging as a service is such a very obvious use case. We need to ensure a non-discriminating approach. The charging infrastructure must not be a proprietary one of just one service operator. Those were some of the points raised by Sebastian on this. I would like to really thank you, Sebastian, Martin, Carlos, and Martina. Thank you for your preparation, the presentations, and all the insights that you shared with the audience. There were lots of comments and questions in the chat. I tried to take up as many as possible, but thanks a lot to you for sharing these insights. Take care.
Okay, take care. Bye.
So we had a different conversation this time, looking at parking as a way into mobility as opposed to mobility. And it's true that we can uncover many different aspects of policy, and we see that cities are trying to think about how to use parking policies as a lever to accompany the modal shift. I had a request in the chat to show the previous poll image. Can we just show the poll image that we showed earlier, please? There was a request in the chat that I just show that. So this is essentially just a screenshot of the poll that EIT Urban Mobility made on LinkedIn, right? So there are 4 options, and EIT Urban Mobility basically asks its followers and other people on LinkedIn to answer. So that's essentially the source for this diagram. I would also like to tell you that in the previous mobility talks, we announced that we were going to ask you to vote for our next topic. Usually we're always sort of working on the next topics with EIT and mobility. We thought that we'd put this time the topic to the vote, and I'm pleased then to announce the results. So we had lots of different topics on the list, and the 2 top topics that came out of more than 450 responses were public transport as number 1, but a very close number 2, and these 2 were really far up, compared to all the others, is health and active mobility. So what we're going to do is we'll do our next mobility talks on public transport. So thanks to all of you who've responded to the poll. And at one point later on, we'll also then add one on health and active mobility, because the two were so close together. Okay, so that's for that announcement as well. Thanks a lot for all your engagement in the chat. It's always good to hear your views, sometimes a little bit contrary. And I was quite surprised as I was walking the streets of Copenhagen that this could be such a public issue, parking. But now I think I understand better. And it's no longer the middle finger, it's definitely the thumbs up to all of you for being part of this Mobility Talks all the time. Thank you so much, and see you next time. Bye-bye.